question why he did not age. He just continued to be the hard-boiled cop, which kind of fits with Corrigan's traditional character as a hard-boiled cop whose drive was taking down and punishing evildoers. And then Jim recalls that he was at a seance somewhere in the 60s trying to catch some crooks, and the spell ended up undoing itself. And so the spell is also reversed on Asmodeus, leading to a rematch. And this is all a nice touchback to showcase number 60, the story which reintroduced Jim Corrigan to DC Comics, this time in the Silver Age. And Jim also recalls that in more recent times, Asmodeus returned. This was during the initial story arc involving the late Amy Baderman. And Father Kramer recalls that he also recalls that Asmodeus had threatened Madame Xanadu before he disappeared. And so Corrigan is left musing as to where Asmodeus has gone, thinking he's probably holed himself up in some poor, unassuming host's body. And it bothers Jim that his friend and mentor has now been threatened as well. But Father Kramer, true to his nature, says, he could have killed me, but he didn't. There's a human soul in there, Jim. Someone is in a lot of pain. And Corrigan agrees with that, and he says, the Archangel Michael said that beings like the Spectre need a human soul to bond with, and Asmodeus says he's my opposite number, so, maybe there is a grain of salt to the idea that there is a human soul somewhere within Asmodeus. And that would turn out to be the case, as in the story arc, which was set to follow this issue, it was revealed that there was a human soul inside Asmodeus, that soul being Karaka, the first human host of the Spectre. Now, the topic changes as Corrigan snaps his fingers and the church is immediately decorated, which Father Kramer isn't too happy about. He says, Jim, I appreciate you wanting to help me here, but, you can't just snap your fingers and make all these decorations appear. There has to be some care put into it. Like, I enjoy decorating this place myself. And so Jim says, okay, with another snap of the fingers, he undoes all the work. But then it leads to Jim saying, okay, Father, if you got anything you wanted for Christmas, anything, what would it be? And Father Kramer doesn't really think too deeply about this. He says, anything? Well, it would be nice if just for Christmas Eve, nobody in New York City murdered anybody else. And at this point, Jim Corrigan makes his usual silent exit as Father Kramer returns the favor and says, what would you like, Jim? And then realizes, and he says, Kramer, you're such a dope. Have you forgotten who you're dealing with here? He's so blasted literal-minded. He's a reactive being. How is he supposed to prevent murders? And what is he going to do if he fails? And what makes this really ominous is that in the previous storyline, Father Kramer making a comment about killings in the world and mentioning the Civil War in Vltava unintentionally inspired Jim Corrigan as the Spectre to go and raze the entire country of Vltava, wiping out all remaining life in that country. And so Kramer is thinking to himself, oh my goodness, what's going to happen now? Just thinking of what happened in Vltava, what have I done now? And certainly things get off to a scary start as the Spectre projects his image across New York City, and he warns them on this holy evening, any person killing another shall face his wrath, and no damnation eternal. And there's this nice close-up on Kramer just putting his hand to his forehead and saying, "Oh, wow, that's certainly going to get people into the spirit of the season." And so here we see elsewhere in New York, a former employee of a gas station breaks in, wielding a rifle, aims it at his former employer who recently let him go, and Kravitz, the man who was let go, shoots his former employer point blank in the stomach. And for good measure, he turns his rifle on one of the gas pumps, and so there's an explosion which gets the Spectre's attention, and he says to Kravitz, "Did you not hear my warning? You have made me upset." And so the Spectre decides that Kravitz's life is now linked to his former employer's. In other words, if the former employer dies, Kravitz will also die. And so the Spectre makes a quick change into Jim Corrigan. Kravitz is saying, "God in heaven have mercy, my wife, my children." And the Spectre, as he carries Kravitz's former employer to the hospital, says, "Hypocrite, why ask God to show mercy when you have shown none?" And we see in a nice touch to the original creators of the Spectre, at the Siegel Bailey General Hospital, Jim Corrigan carries in the badly wounded former employer as well as Kravitz. And he sticks around long enough to ask the doctor if the employer will live. And the doctor says, "Well, at least until morning, and we'll see what happens then." So far, nobody has killed another person in New York. But still, that doesn't mean a whole lot, as this victim here may very well pass away after midnight. But Jim Corrigan, true to his character, his hard-boiled nature, says, good enough. Why did he do it? He was warned. And the doctor says, "Okay, so you heard the big voice, this guy. Well, New Yorkers, no one can tell them anything." And Corrigan says, "I guess not." And Ridgway does a really nice job of showing Corrigan as looking rather disaffected here. But then we get that ominous close-up on Corrigan's eyes with the skulls in place of the pupils, and he says they're killing each other again. And the scene shifts to an alleyway where a man named Eduardo Ramirez has been shot point blank by an adolescent named Jose. And Jose is, I'm guessing about 13 or 14, bragging about how he shot this man, smoked him. And 3 other men who are with Jose says, "Yeah, you proved yourself. You're one of us now." Well, Spectre shows up, and he first goes into the eyes of Eduardo Ramirez, looking to see if there's a chance to bring his soul back. And he manages to go into the abyss, the heavens, and he reaches out to Eduardo's soul, who says, "They shot me for no reason. I was going home to my wife, my kids. It's Christmas Eve. I'm dead. Help me." And Spectre says, "Help and vengeance will both be yours." So he reunites Eduardo's soul with his body, but Eduardo was writhing with pain. And Spectre says, "Well, it'll only last until the night is over. And then when I've made good my gift to let you live through the night, your soul may depart again." And here's where Eduardo appeals to the soul within the specter and says, "You bring me back only to suffer? This is my life, my pain, my death. Have you no understanding what it is to die?" And we see the specter briefly transform back into Corrigan. He says, "Yes." And he says, "Now as a specter, your pain will be eased as vengeance is also claimed." And what he decides to do is he basically turns his fingers into like poison darts, and he fires them on Jose and his three fellow gang members. And Spectre says to them, "Little boys pretending to be great men. Little fools, the only great thing about you is your sins, for which you will now pay." And it looks like he's about to render them up for final judgment. But Jose speaks out and says, "I'm a juvenile, don't you know? These older guys let me into this. Don't I get some kind of break? I'm just a kid." To which the Spectre basically says, "Well, that does nothing for me. You're old enough to commit the sin. You're old enough to learn its consequences." Basically, what the Spectre does here is, instead of killing Jose and his three friends right away, he transfers all of Eduardo's pain into them. As Spectre explains to Eduardo, so the pain is gone, the wound is still there on your chest. You're still going to die when morning comes, but at least you will live without pain for the rest of this night. And he tells Eduardo, Jose, and the three others, "You each have only a little time left to you. I suggest you make the most of it," because the Spectre has decided that in the morning, Jose and the other three, they are going to die. They are going to meet their maker. And it's nice to see that Eduardo is a pretty compassionate person. For all he's been shot, he turns to the four and says, "I have a wife, my children. I'm going to go see them one more time. You children, go see your families." So instead of laying a beat down on them, he just leaves them. And Jose starts crying and says, "I got no one. Where do I go?" And the Spectre has no answer for that. But he's quite perturbed in that twice now he's failed in his quest. He's reacted only after a gun was fired and the soul departed the body. He says there must be another way. And so what he does is he casts his entire essence into the city itself, basically to see into the eyes of everyone in the city as a way of preventing murders from happening. And he's successful in that regard, but he has to move second to second, second by second, if he's going to stop the madness. He realizes that if he takes away their weapons, they're just going to use their bodies. So he strains himself even further into the very souls of all the people of New York. And we get this great splash page where you see a Spectre yell out, "No," with all these faces of random people overlapping his head. And the Spectre actually breaks down. He says, "So much, too much." He feels everything, all the love, all the hate, the greatness, the pettiness. He says, "Is this how God perceives humanity?" And we see a Spectre, he's weeping. He says, "How does he stand it?" Scene shifts back to Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which is presided over by Father Richard Kramer. And Eduardo was taking his family to midnight mass. He says to his wife, "I figure if we're never to have another Christmas together, another midnight mass together, let's make this one enough." And we see Father Kramer wishing Merry Christmas and Feliz Navidad to everyone. And Jose approaches Father Kramer and says, "You've got to help me." And he explains what he did in the alleyway. And he explains that the man in the green cape has decided that he will die in the morning as punishment. And Father Kramer promises Jose that nothing will happen. At that point, the Spectre appears and says, "Well, why shouldn't he pay for crime he has committed?" And Father Kramer says, "Because he has repented. There's such a thing as forgiveness. It's Christmas." And Father Kramer says, to Spectre, "Are you greater than God?"